Hi everyone. So this week we are talking about Chapter 9 and how it relates to the Hockaday case. Chapter 9 focuses primarily on conflict in organizations. Sometimes I think that the conflict can be direct clashing of ideas and opinions and people, and other times I think conflict can be a situation that is a problem, a conflicting situation where there might be disagreements on how the situation should be handled, or the situation itself might be the conflict that people are facing. So the first question we have here is, what primary conflict approaches are used in the Hockaday case? And first I want to predicate this with the fact that I looked through the text and couldn't find anything specifically referencing approaches, so I think that the predispositions discussed in the text are actually the approaches that we're supposed to be identifying here. So the approaches that I would say are exhibited in the case are competition, which emphasizes personal goals and needs and does not consider the opinions, goals, or needs of others. I would also say that avoidance can be found in the case. People with the avoidance approach are unlikely to pursue their own goals and needs or the goals and needs of others. And I think that near the end of the case, when the team members were dealing with the European city and taking preventative measures, I think that collaboration was used in that situation. The team worked together a little better in that situation and was able to problem solve much more effectively. I think, well, the next question 2, is what predispositions, strategies, and tactics did the upper management team use in the different conflicts that were involved in the case? I would say that in regard to the U.S. city, the conflict and all that went on in that situation, the upper management team pretty much stayed out of it. I would say that that would be an avoidance approach or predisposition. They didn't interfere with what the virtual team was doing. They kind of avoided the issue, and then they only recapped and engaged in what they referred to as a hot wash at the end of the situation. They didn't really provide a lot of backup support or conflict resolution management or facilitation to the virtual team. They just kind of stayed out of it. And so I would say that that is an example of avoidance. When it came to the issue in the European city, I would say that the upper management team did set an example in collaboration. They kind of started the process by saying, here's the issue, we need to collaborate on this and figure out what position everybody's going to take so that we can prevent the same thing from happening in the event in the European city as did in the U.S. city. They made compromises, who would go where. They collaborated and assigned different roles and put everyone in place before an issue could even occur. That way the situation could be handled smoothly. The third question is to evaluate the predisposition, strategies, and tactics used by the virtual team members. I would say that in the situation with the European city, the U.S. city, the virtual team members mostly used the competition approach or predisposition. They emphasized personal goals and needs and did not consider the opinions of others. So some of them were thinking that it was a hardware problem, some of them were thinking it was a software problem. So all of them had these goals of the different things they wanted to figure out for the case, but they didn't really agree on anything, and they all wanted to compete and figure out what the problem was on their own. And so that would definitely be an example of competition, of the competition approach. They used tactics such as breaking previously agreed upon rules. Francois tried to take over for Mary and lead the team instead of what was agreed upon, that Mary would be the leader. Francois was behaving aggressively, and the other team members were limiting choices. This can be seen in them asking to be released from their position so that they could go and research the hardware or the software and deal with things hands-on. I think Mary specifically used avoidance. She didn't really pursue her own goals or the goals of the other team members. She just kind of took a little bit of a hands-off approach. She remained the leader and tried to bring in collaboration, but I think she was trying so hard to avoid the conflict that she wasn't really able to facilitate any sort of real collaboration. In the situation with the European city, I think that virtual team members did a much better job collaborating. They had the support of the upper management team in this case, and were able to work together to come up with where everyone should be, what people should be doing, and were able to handle the situation much more smoothly. The tactics involved in handling that situation, or strategies, would mostly be compromising. They were willing to brainstorm the issue and then say, you go here, and we'll get this figured out together, rather than, I think this might be the issue, or I think this is the issue, and we're all going to figure it out on our own. So they did a much better job handling the situation or the conflict that time. The last question is to evaluate what other things I think Jill should consider in the case. So first of all, I think she should consider training the virtual team members on how to handle conflict with customers. The only real issue we saw in the case was the way Francois got frustrated with the client in the U.S. city for not providing someone knowledgeable who could work with them on the situation. He got really frustrated by that and angry and kind of lashed out. I don't know if he got angry directly with the clients. It doesn't really discuss how he handled it, but I do think it's important for the team members to be aware of how they should be handling the conflict. The second thing I think that Jill should be aware of is how to foster positive dissent. I think that while the team members definitely showed a lot of disagreement, they disagreed on what the problems were, they disagreed on how the situation should be handled, that disagreement wasn't really fostered in a manner that was productive. They could have come up with a lot of solutions from those disagreements if they had sat down and brainstormed and all been on the same page, but they didn't. They just kind of took their own way and tried to solve the problems on their own. So I think Jill should develop a process for handling conflict and train the team members on that, and also create a supportive environment. If the upper management team had been more involved, I think that the virtual team members would have been able to handle conflict better, would have been able to handle the disagreements they faced on what the issue was, and would have been able to say, no, don't take off on your own. We're going to sit down and brainstorm this together and figure out what the actual issue is and what the conflict is here, which would have been really important. I think that leads to the next thing I think Jill should consider, which is problem identification. This was discussed in the text as very important for all conflict participants to agree on what the problem is and define it before engaging in conflict resolution. If you don't really know what the problem is, you can't really try to resolve it effectively. So I think that the team members needed to sit down and say, here's what the problem is, here's how we need to go about reaching a solution, and here's what we want our end goal to be. I think if they had defined the problem early on, they would have come to a much quicker solution in dealing with the European city. I think they did a little bit of this in the European city. They realized, hey, there's a problem with our technology or hardware, whatever it was, and they identified that and collaborated in order to effectively handle the situation in Europe. I think they did a pretty good job of that, but there's definitely room for improvement, and definitely Jill should consider establishing a procedure for problem identification in the future, and this would help the team to handle conflict much more effectively. Thanks.